Today, we are going to be talking about solving one-step equations. Now, when solving one-step equations, you must always remember that it is like a balance because it shows that two quantities are equal. So while solving, again, you must always remember what you do to one side of the equation must also be done to the other side to keep it balanced. For example, let's use apples to visually see this balance. You must keep the scale balanced. If we add 3 apples to this side, what must we do to this side? Now you see that I added 3 apples to this side and had to add 3 apples to this side to make sure that the scale was balanced. Now when solving one-step equations, you need to ask 3 questions about the equations before you even get started. What is the variable? What operation is performed on the variable? So this might be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. And what is the inverse operation, the one that will undo what is being done to the variable? Now let's just look over what the inverse operations of each type of operation you may see in an equation. Now the inverse of operation of addition is subtraction. The inverse operation of subtraction is addition. The inverse operation of multiplication is division. And the inverse of division is multiplication. Now we're going to look at an example you might see when solving one-step equations with addition. So here we have an example that says to solve x plus 4 equals 12. Remember to ask ourselves the 3 questions. What is the variable? In this equation, the variable is x. What operation is being performed on the variable? We see that it is being added, so we say addition. The last question says, what is the inverse operation? We just learned that the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. So here we have our equation, x plus 4 equals 12, and we note that using the subtraction property of equality, we must subtract 4 from both sides of the equation. Now remember, we mentioned to do this, you must do the same thing on both sides to keep the equation equal, just like a balance. So I'm going to subtract 4 from this side, and then remember we have to do it to the other side. So then we have x equals whatever 12 minus 4 is, and that is 8. So we have our answer is 8. And you can always check your answers. It is super easy to check your answers with these examples. So we start by writing the original problem, which is x plus 4 equals 12. And we can plug in our answer. So we have our 8 goes in for our x. Bring down the 4. 8 plus 4 equals 12. And we look, does it match the original equation? It does, so it is correct. X equals 8 is our answer. Now let's look at something a little different. We can solve it using subtraction as well. Here we have in our example, it says to solve y minus 7 equals negative 13. We ask ourselves our 3 main questions. What is the variable? In this case, the variable is y. What operation is being performed on the variable? We see that it is subtraction. Then we think to ourselves, what is the inverse operation of subtraction? It is addition. So using the addition property of equality, we're going to add 7 to both sides since it is being subtracted. So we have our equation, y minus 7 equals negative 13. And this addition property of equality tells us to add the same thing on both sides to keep the equation equal, like a balance. So we take plus 7 on the left side, do the same thing to the right. Be careful, you're dealing with a negative number in this case. We have our new number, y equals negative 6. So let's check that to see if that's right, because it's super easy to do. We have our original, y minus 7 equals negative 13. We take what our value is for y and plug it in. So we have negative 6 minus 7 equals what? We get negative 13. We notice that it does match our original equation, so that is correct. Now we're going to solve one-step equations with multiplication. We have our example. It says to solve negative 6a equals 12. Now what is the variable in this case? It is a. What operation is being performed on the variable? It is multiplication. What is the inverse operation of multiplication? It is division. So here we have our equation, negative 6a equals 12. Using the division property, we are going to divide both sides of the equation by negative 6. Do not forget your negative. This might be a little tricky. The division property of equality tells us to divide the same thing on both sides to keep the equation equal, just like a balance. So here I'm going to use my little division sign. Remember, the fraction means to divide. Divide both sides by negative 6. And one thing to note with division, if you take negative 6 divided by negative 6, that equals 1. And 1a means the same thing as a. So you can just write a or 1a. Either way is fine. So I'm just going to write a. And then I take 12 divided by negative 6 is negative 2. So that is my answer. But to make sure, I'm going to check. So I take my original problem. I take my negative 2 and plug it in for a. And then I do the math. Negative 6 times negative 2 equals 12. Does it match my original equation? It does. So it is. Now lastly, the last example is equations with division. I'm going to solve b divided by 2 equals negative 10. I ask myself, what is the variable? The variable is b. What operation is being performed on the variable? I see that it is being divided. And what is the inverse operation of division? It is multiplication. Now, using the multiplication property of equality, I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by 2. And remember, this property means we have to do the same thing on both sides to keep the equation equal, just like a balance. So I take my original equation, b over 2 equals negative 10. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 since it is being divided. So that cancels that side of 2's, and I have my b alone, which equals negative 10 times 2, which is negative 20. So I think this is my answer, so I'm going to check just to make sure I have my original equation. I'm going to plug in my negative 20 for b. Negative 20 divided by 2 equals negative 10. And I see that that matches my original equation, so that is correct. So in summary, when solving one-step equations, always use the inverse operation to undo the operation that is done on the variable. And always check your work and make sure your equations are balanced.